Those Days with the Monsters, Part 37. The ship left jump space smoothly. The crew assembled on the bridge, watching in eerie silence. From the main viewport, Kirill could see a tiny fleck of white and red below, surrounded by what looked like a glimmering swarm of little minnows. Ships. That fleck looked frighteningly familiar.
Captain, is that Kazurkan again?
The captain watched the planet for a moment. Bashful. I want passive spectrum reads on every ship down there. Size, distance from the planet, all of it. Put it up on TAC. Bashful nodded, and then, in the darkness, another blue hologram popped up. A sphere surrounded by a haze of red flecks. What's their furthest distance from the planet? It looks like about twice planetary radius, so well within the zone. Right, let's activate and get out. Kirill's frills flared. Was the mysterious iron shoes about to be used? He didn't want to see it. Strap in, boys. Bashful bared her teeth. Jump in 10, 9. Hang on tight, Squishy. The captain bared his teeth too. The crew moved quickly to the wall seats and began to buckle in. Kirill fumbled with the restraints. This made no sense. They'd already freed the sapients on Kazurkan. What were they doing back here? And why for so short a time? The ship hummed with activity. Hands reached over and helped adjust the restraints on Kirill's seat. He glanced over to see Smee baring his teeth at him, looking almost like he was playing a game. His eyes flashed with what looked like excitement, though Kirill's translator just interpreted it as happiness. Kirill didn't think Smee was happy. Just excited? No, he wasn't just excited. He almost looked like he'd been dosed with something illicit. He would have to ask Doc about it later. 5, 4... The countdown continued, but the captain looked at Bashful, and she looked back with level eyes. The sound seemed to fade. Kirill wasn't sure if he was reading the expressions properly, but he got a feeling that Bashful was challenging the captain somehow, and the captain was replying that he was sure. Bashful. The bridge went silent. The captain's voice was more quiet and sober than Kirill had ever heard it. Light 'em up. 1. The ship leaped into jump space, and Kirill felt the world spin and straighten out. He glanced out the viewport, trying not to look for too long, and stood dazed. The too distant and too near planet shimmered with brilliant refractive clouds.
What the hell is that?
This didn't seem like what he'd envisioned with the name Iron Shoes. Had the Kumans misled him? That's Operation Washerwoman. The weapon itself is, well, Sleepy calls it the glass coffin. The captain looked out the viewport briefly, and then turned Kirill's face away. Don't look too long, Squishy. That's more dangerous than the usual. The captain looked away as well. Bashful. Close the viewport. We don't need anyone getting lost. Sure thing, Cap. Bashful sounded subdued. Smee's face still showed excitement, but most of the crew looked serious.
Captain, what was that? Why did we come back to Kazurkan? And why does everyone look like something bad happened?
The captain sighed. Sleepy? Can I hand this over to you? Sleepy shook his head. Sorry, Cap. I don't want this one. You can do it yourself or you can hand it over to someone else, but I'm not doing it. Who else am I going to give it to? Dopey? Smee? Grumpy? Sleepy groaned, rubbing his forehead. Cap, I can't. You got to. Could you, if the roles were swapped? Sleepy took a swallow from a little flask in his pocket. The captain looked like he didn't approve of that, but Sleepy wasn't done talking. Say you had a kid, and you had to tell him something like this. Could you do it, Cap? The captain was silent for a moment. The whole bridge seemed to wait for an answer. Finally, the captain opened his mouth to respond. Fine, I'll do it. Both Sleepy and the captain stopped, turning to the source of the light voice. Bashful's blue hologram flickered slightly as they stared at her. Kirill, we should go to your quarters. This is going to be a long talk. Kirill made his way to his quarters. It felt odd to be going to meet with someone he'd just seen on the bridge, and not to walk with them. When he entered his quarters, Bashful's hologram flickered to life from his holopad. Kirill's frills flared slightly. He found her sudden appearance unnerving, especially when part of him was still half expecting her to walk in behind him. Sit down. This isn't going to be fun, and I'd rather minimize the damage if you pass out again. Kirill sat awkwardly, fidgeting a little. There was a moment of silence while he stared at the hologram, before he finally found the words he wanted.
Everyone looks like something happened. What happened? We were only there for a little bit.
Bashful sighed, crossed the room and sat beside him. There must have been a slight miscalculation because the hologram was sitting almost Kirill's handspan above the bed, but it was close enough that he could ignore it. Well, one raid on a farming planet is one thing. When we engaged the glass coffin, that's when things became serious. Bashful looked away for a moment. Sugar, we might talk about war some, but we don't go into it lightly. War has a way of killing people we don't mean to kill, half of them not even by the enemy. We talked about war, we planned for war, we made weapons for it, and tried to get allies for it, but we could still back out if we wanted to. It didn't have to be war. We could have faded away and let the rest of the universe decide what they wanted to do. That's not an option anymore. Kirill remembered the radiant, glimmering refraction around the planet. It was breathtaking. Something so beautiful was a declaration of war.
What do you mean?
Well, the thing about Kazurkan is it's close to the edge of Tizik space. That means it might look like easy pickings for a young species looking to expand. From what Dopey found, the Tiziks don't really understand an outside force trying for liberation. They were ready for revolts, but since we came from outside and took the planet, they didn't think it could be about the sapients. Do you see where this is going, Sugar? Bashful had the same look on her face that Sleepy had had when Kirill worked out the difference between washerwoman and woodsman. Kirill didn't really like that look too much. He didn't know if it was because the tactics made his head hurt, or because it was starting to be easier to understand. Thinking like a human wasn't something he really wanted to consider. Still, Bashful had been nothing but kind to him, and she was waiting for an answer. He was going to ask if they had actually meant to blow up the planet and failed, but that didn't make sense.
But, wait, no. Is Kazurkan the sheets?
Bashful's teeth bared themselves, and she abruptly leaned forward slightly. Yes, I knew you'd get it, Sugar.
So, when the wolf ran over the sheets, you thought the Tiziks would come back to Kazurkan?
Not just any Tiziks. Bashful's teeth were still bared, though she seemed less excited than before. If they think someone's after their planet and about to come with colony ships, they're expecting some resistance, maybe even a full military escort. She paused again, as if waiting for Kirill to work it out, but he didn't have the faintest idea what she was getting at. The human stories weren't helping him with this one. After a moment, Bashful asked the question she wanted answered, aloud. Kirill, what kind of ships do you suppose are on Kazurkan right now? Kirill's head hurt.
With the kind of weapons you humans use? Probably broken ones.
Bashful made the human amusement noise. That's fair, but there should also be some intact ones. I wasn't looking for that. If you're planning to capture colony ships, but you also expect them to have some kind of guard, what do?
Have a bigger guard? With more weapons?
Kirill felt like he was learning more than he wanted to from the humans. Was this what Sleepy had talked about, constantly increasing their army to stay stronger than the opponent? He was glad the Yalem didn't really have wars. Wait, wars? How had he missed the fact that this was a war? Maybe the Tiziks thought it was a war already, even though the humans hadn't yet.
That was an army?
Yeah, pretty big one too. Dopey says it might be as much as a third of the Tiziks military that we just locked in. Bashful's teeth that had bared themselves vanished, and she looked sad and grim. We just proved that we can trap or kill a third of the whole species military in just one blow. There's no going back. They won't allow us to just disappear. We have no choice but war now. Kirill saw her hands clenched in her lap. We didn't want to bring you in on this. I think there's still time to drop you off with Effie if you don't want any part of it. She's good at keeping secrets, and we can give her what we know about your biology. It'd be safer than being on this ship and...
No.
Kirill couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. His frills flared in shock.
What am I saying? What am I thinking?
But he couldn't stop it.
I can't make you deal with it alone.
He heard General Corbus's voice echoing in his head. Take good care of your humans. He didn't know what the danger was, but he wasn't going to let them go alone. What if they died and he wasn't there? Something in his heart screamed at the thought.
Never.
He could die if he went, but he had always been about to die. That was what it meant to be a rollaway. But he wasn't going to do it alone. Not in a little cold room curled up as the heat left him, stained a dark blue-black.
Never.
You might die. It's war.
Don't care.
That was a lie. Kirill cared, quite a bit actually, but if he died in a war, it was better than giving up and going blue, right? And the Coons were insane. They were miracle workers. He might even live.
I don't have anywhere else to belong. I'd rather die like this than alone in a room somewhere.
After a moment of silence, Bashful nodded. If that's what you want, then we'll respect it. Report to Hook immediately, please. If you're going to come along, we're stepping it up. Thank you for listening to episode 37 of Those Days with the Monsters. Read by me, a good bee.